So what about management? You notice I haven't said a word about management yet. There's a great quote from Warren Buffett that good jockeys will do well on good horses, but not on broken down nags. So this is a professional jockey on a goat. He is a very good manager. Sadly, he is on a bad vehicle called a goat. So if you enter this in a race, he's probably going to lose. By contrast, if you got me, and I don't even know how to ride a horse, as long as I don't fall off, I probably beat the goat. Because the horse is better suited for winning races than the goat. You're not going to get much milk out of it. The goat is better for that. But it's very well suited for winning races. So the key here is that you want to get a good horse. You want to look for good horses. It's not that the jockey is irrelevant. It's that even the best jockey, if he's on a goat, isn't going to make you a lot of money or win many races. Managers matter in the context of the moat. And the way to think about this is very simple. The required level of managerial skill is inversely related to the quality of the business. The worse the business, the better the manager. The better the business, as long as management isn't that stupid, you'll do fine. If it's a really bad business, you better have an awesome manager. This is Ryanair. O'Leary is an absolute genius. He's a jerk, and customers hate flying Ryanair, but he has created an amazing, amazing business. Ryanair is scale advantages to die for. By contrast, if you have a great business, genius is not needed. You saw where this was going, I know. He's actually, what that actually means is, here's what's happened to Microsoft's moat while I've been in charge. It's an easy target here at Google, but it's true. I mean, Steve Ballmer essentially spent 12 years setting money on fire at Microsoft as far as. So the key here is that moats can buffer management mistakes. Microsoft minted money despite Steve Ballmer. Despite them shoveling dirt in the moat every day, the core Office, the core Windows franchises were strong enough that the business overall maintained pretty high returns on capital. New Coke didn't kill Coca-Cola because the business was robust enough, the brand is strong enough. Moody's put profits before integrity, actively screwed investors, and still cranked out a 40% operating margin. That's a pretty good moat. But even a genius like David Neeleman couldn't change the fact that JetBlue is an airline, which is the worst industry known to mankind. I mean, he's an amazing manager. If you've ever met him, read any of his books, seen him speak, he's incredible, he's inspirational. You know, JetBlue was like 30-odd times earnings when it went public because it had leather seats and TV. I mean, an airline will never have lower costs than the day it opens for business. Why? Planes don't get newer, they get older. Employees don't get less seniority, they get more. So the planes cost more to run, the employees want more money. So the cost structure is inevitably bound to decline. Again, great jockey on a goat. Good managers are constantly looking for ways to widen a company's moat. Think about Amazon's focus on the customer experience. It's not so much about scale, it's about the customer experience. Here's a great, let me try this here. I've tried this at other talks around the world. How many of you have bought something off Amazon without checking the price elsewhere? Okay, that's like 2/3, 3/4 of the hands. Isn't that an amazing statistic right there? I mean, how hard is it to click to another website? What's the caloric cost of moving your mouse? It's not high, right? And a lot of this is the customer experience, right? Trust matters more online than offline. And I give Amazon enormous credit for figuring this out early. That offline, in a regular physical store, I give you money, you give me a good, and we're finished. There's no trust involved. Online, I have to trust you send me what I ordered. I have to trust you don't steal my credit card number. I have to trust it arrives when you say it will. I have to trust you'll take it back if you say you will. There's a lot of trust involved. And that enabled the ability to build a moat, build a brand in retailing, which is a really tough industry to do that in. Think about Costco's focus on using scale to lower costs. Costco gets bigger, cost savings go right back to the customer. That brings in more customers, which allows more cost savings that go right back to the customer. That's what drives their business. That's all they think about every day. Now, by contrast, bad managers invest capital outside a company's moat, which lowers overall returns on capital. This process is called deworsification, or setting fire to large piles of cash. okay? This is basically what you don't want to see a company doing. Example, Cisco moving into consumer markets, the Netgear acquisition, I think it was. What on earth was that? You had this gorgeous, sticky business in enterprise, and you start selling consumer electronics that any moron just buys off the shelf at Circuit City? I mean, my set-top box at home used to be a Cisco, and I would just curse that thing every time I looked at it. Because it was just the worst business to go into. I mean, just fast product cycles, no competitive advantage. The whole network-centric home, so what? Remember Garmin? Anybody remember the Nuvi handset? No, nobody? Okay, so Garmin had this great franchise, partially in GPS devices in the car, but also a much better franchise in avionics. So that your business jets, regional jets often have Garmin as the GPS device in there. You own a plane, you really want to know where you are. So that business was a very good, sticky business. And so they see, oh gosh, GPS is going from a product to a feature. That's basically just a feature of a smartphone. Oh, let's not relax to the inevitable and just get out of the business. Let's double down and go into handsets and compete with Ericsson and Nokia. Completely moronic. And so, again, you see investing outside the moat. You see a business do that out of weakness as opposed to out of strength when they're trying to maintain growth like Cisco did. It's a horrible sign. Yep, question.
How do you differentiate that from being innovative? Like Google, for example.
Great question. No, I knew this was coming. So the question is, how do you differentiate that from being innovative? Because Google's doing it out of strength, right? Google's not doing it to preserve growth or because their core business is dying. Google's doing it as a way of planting seeds for hopefully a great business in the future. And that means a subtle difference, but it's coming out. The key thing is it's coming out of strength. Google's core business isn't going down. It's when you see a company's core business either slowing or the competitive advantage eroding, and they try to basically invest outside that to bump up growth. So, Cisco, one of the reasons they went into consumer electronics, Netgear, was to compensate for the fact that the enterprise market was slowing down. Or you can just say, hey guys, we'll grow at 6% and not 16 anymore. That would have been the more rational response. Instead, they go out and take a blowtorch to giant piles of cash by buying, remember the Flip? 800 million bucks on this, basically a little video camera that will about 6 months later be in your phone. I mean, again, out of weakness versus out of strength. Yep, another question.
How much of this kind of stupidity is correlated to the fact that these businesses that are sometimes wide modes are not run by owner-operators? You would imagine if you have an owner-operator, he would not.
Yeah. So the question is sort of how much of this stupidity is correlated to businesses that aren't run by owner-operators. I think it's a good. John Chambers owned a decent chunk of Cisco, but I do think you see it less frequently with owner-operator businesses. You see it more frequently with businesses run by hired hands, where if the CEO leaves, he'll get a giant golden parachute, and he goes off and plays golf, and nobody's the worse off except the poor saps who owned the stock. So I think by having an owner-operator, you lessen this chance, but they're not infallible. I mean, the danger is when you have businesses that can't relax to change. And especially it's when you see this a lot actually with tech companies. No, not just tech companies, but companies when they mature. So this happened to McDonald's, it happened to Home Depot, happened to Starbucks, happened to Cisco, happened to Microsoft. As they get larger and have to go from being growth companies to being mature companies, they start continuing to act like teenagers when they're actually in their 50s. I mean, it's like the 50-year-old guy who's trying to date a 20-year-old. It's just inappropriate. And it's the same thing when you're a super successful business like Starbucks, when they just kept opening new stores. I remember there was a great Onion story once. Starbucks opened Starbucks in the Starbucks bathroom, because they were just everywhere, right? And Howard Schultz came back and realized that the return on capital for these new stores was really not very high. And so the better way to allocate capital was not open crap loads of new stores. It was slow openings and focus on making more money, increasing ticket sizes, introducing food and so forth at existing stores. So, many businesses go through this transition. Now, there is, I should say, an exception to every rule about sort of management and the horse being more important than the jockey. There are a tiny minority of managers who can create enormous value via astute capital allocation, even if they don't start with great horses. Warren Buffett at Berkshire started with a textile mill, for God's sake. Brian Joffe at Bidvest, which is a South African firm, started with nothing. And now they do logistics, they do distribution, they do food service, amazing business. Dick Kovacevic at Wells Fargo, and banking is a tough business, really tough business. But what Kovacevic and Stumpf have done is nothing short of amazing. Stephen Mitchell at Danaher. Danaher has actually beaten Berkshire in the past 20 years in terms of shareholder returns. It started off selling industrial pumps, and they bought Beckman Coulter a few years ago, big diagnostics firm. So again, there is an exception to every rule. There is a tiny minority of managers that can make something out of not much. So keep an eye out for them. They're hard to find, false positives abound, but these guys can create enormous wealth over time. So just a kind of a sideline from the moat conversation, but my point here, I don't want you to go out of here thinking management is irrelevant, because there is this tiny minority of guys that can just do amazing things. Yeah, there's a question there in the back.
I was wondering what's the role of chance in all of this? In the examples of products that are created, like new Coke, maybe they should not have done that and so on.
Yeah.
For every new Coke that did not work out, maybe there is another product by some other company that did work out.
Sadly, investing does not lend itself well to statistical, proof, because you have individual examples where in highly skewed results, right? Where you have this huge long tail where a few companies do incredibly well and a very small number do okay. You probably would enjoy reading. There's a recent book by some, I think they're Deloitte, not McKinsey, Deloitte guys, called Three Rules, where they did a pretty rigorous statistical analysis on returns on capital, and then went back and they did a whole bunch of, they did a bunch of pairwise analysis. They did a lot of controlling for industry factors to try to kind of eliminate the odds of luck happening with things, and looking sort of over what characteristics identified businesses that were likely to succeed over a long period of time. But there is a luck component to this, right? I mean, example from Berkshire Hathaway. I mean, Warren Buffett, when early on, went to Washington, D.C. on the weekend to try to learn about insurance at Geico. He got the janitor. He basically banged on the door of Geico, and I can't remember the manager's name, but one of you Buffett nuts probably remembers, let him in and basically gave him like a 5-hour lesson on how to run and how to do insurance well. If that hadn't happened, would he have really gotten the early tutelage in insurance and then created what Berkshire became? Maybe not. Again, my point here is simply, I don't want to, luck happens, right? I mean, chance is part of it. But your choice is either say, this stuff is unknowable, and I'm just going to index, which is a completely rational thing to do, by the way. Or if we want to try to identify these businesses, we look for common characteristics that seem to have held up over long periods of time. But there is a role of chance in creating successful companies.